Says threats to constitutional government spring from the paucity or lack of serious public discourse. This from an uninformed public. Do you agree or disagree with the opinion expressed here? Why? What rules did the framers establish to ensure serious, fair discussion at the Philadelphia Convention, and are those rules still useful today? What responsibility, if any, do schools have for teaching students how to engage in informed civil discourse, and why? You may begin.
The serious lack of public discourse in our society today has led to the greatest threat of our constitutional government, an uninformed public. The paucity of political education among United States citizens today is at an all-time low and is threatening to tear down the foundations upon which this country was built.
The new National Defense Authorization Act, which was signed into law on January 1st, 2012, allows United States citizens to be detained indefinitely without their due process rights by seemingly ignoring the Ninth Amendment. In the newly proposed bill, the Stop Online Piracy Act, recently suspended until late 2012, will prove to cripple the freedom of internet speech and force various thriving internet businesses like YouTube, Wikipedia, and Google to a grinding halt in favor of the protection of the entertainment industry's rights.
Without public discourse and proper education, laws like the NDAA and SOPA will result in a devolution of civil rights. Stop Online Piracy Act. The government wants to censor the internet and protect the rights of the entertainment industry. Proper public discourse protects the rights of the American citizen and prevents America in 2012 from turning into George Orwell's 1984.
During the Philadelphia Constitution Convention, the framers established several rules for discussion and fair discourse. The rules are, as well as their modern use, as follows. Delegates from at least 7 states had to be present for the convention to do business each day. Today, this rule is set at half+1 for the House of Representatives and 1/5 a quorum for the Senate in order to conduct business. This is important in order to ensure meetings cannot be held in secret without the knowledge of the majority of Congress.
If a delegate's absence would leave a state without representation, then he had to get permission to be absent. More has been added to this rule following the scandal of the missing congressmen of Wisconsin and Indiana during the budget crisis. Article 6, Section 2 through 4 of the Rules of Senate state that no senator shall absent himself from the service of the Senate without leave, and states that the majority of Congress may direct the Sergeant-at-Arms to compel the attendance of the absent senators. This prevents members of the Senate from freeing themselves from the responsibility of difficult decisions.
When rising to speak, a delegate had to address the president. While he was speaking, other members could not pass notes, hold conversations with one another, or read a book, pamphlet, or paper. This rule has been modified under Article 19, Section 1, to refer to the presiding officer and not the president. This rule ensures all voices who wish to speak will be heard and will not fall on deaf ears.
A member was not allowed to speak more than twice on the same question. He could not speak the second time until every other member had first had an opportunity to speak on the subject. This rule is still current under Article 19, Section 2 of the Rules of Senate.
Committees shall be appointed as necessary. Article 24, Section 1 of the Rules of Senate still hold its viability of the Senate. The Senate shall appoint the chairman of each such committee and the other members thereof. Standing, joint, select, and conference committees are all necessary in maintaining maximum efficiency.
The convention's proceedings were to remain secret. Article 21, Section 1 of the Rules of Senate allow for closed-door meeting, for the content in these meetings to remain confidential under the 29th and 31st Articles. This rule is necessary to protect military secrets like the proceedings of the assassination of Osama bin Laden on May 3, 2011. The rules of Congress are necessary in order to promote proper discourse and ensure our Congress utilizes the maximum possible efficiency.
John Dewey, in his book entitled School and Society in 1899, stated, "Democracy has to be born anew every generation, and education is its midwife." In Paler v. Doe, education is a fundamental right under the 14th Amendment. Through this, schools assume the responsibility to grant students an education in government and the tools necessary to hold informed civil discourse. The students who are being taught today are the men and women who will be our leaders in the future. If they are not taught proper proceedings in civil discourse, then our future leaders would be consumed by their inability to find common ground and solutions.
Through informed civil discourse, citizens are able to remain informed and up-to-date on current governmental proceedings. Civil discourse protects the rights of the citizen by enabling worthwhile debates to spread the flow of knowledge, and is the greatest check the people have on their government.
Classes like We the People are model examples of how our schools teach students how to engage in informed civil discourse. Knowing how to engage in informed civil discourse will help us as students be able to become well-rounded citizens, be successful in the workforce, and be an active citizen in the government. Thank you.
Why is it important for Americans to participate in a civic life?
It's important for Americans to participate in a civic life. If I can reference Congressman Skaggs in a conference called The Us, he stated that the lack of education in our society and the lack of knowledge of what's going on in our government leads to a heightened sense of paranoia in our government, a lack of distrust. It's important for people to participate in the civic duty and understand and learn what's going on in their government in order to trust it and have faith in their government.
Citizens must be civic in order to maintain a balance and a respect for one another in order for mob rule to not take over.
If citizens aren't engaged in their society and don't utilize their rights under the First Amendment to expression or utilize their right to arms, or simply don't know that they have these fundamental rights, they can go away if they're not exercising their right and if they're not knowledgeable in what they can do as citizens and in their rights as citizens.
Oh, there we go. You guys said in your testimony, it seemed you're implying that protecting the right of free speech on the internet is vital to promoting serious public discourse. I would actually put to you that the internet and the flow of disinformation and misinformation has actually diminished our public discourse. What would your argument against that be?
I would disagree with you because blogs are a great way to express civil discourse and get your ideas and thoughts out there with other people that might disagree or agree with you, which is a great place to enhance civil discourse.
While there are outlets on the internet that don't necessarily project correct information, there's also outlets on the television that don't necessarily promote correct information, and it's civic education's duty to teach students to understand what knowledge they can utilize and what knowledge is true and just, and what knowledge is just for the comic relief or just out there as someone's opinion in that way. And that's the responsibility of the school's education, for students to understand the difference between these two types of information. And they're prevalent on television as well as on the internet.
Absolutely, and as far as really this freedom of expression on the internet, Reno versus ACLU ruled that the internet cannot be limited and what's on the internet must remain free. And it's important to note that as our youth today is as connected to technology and especially to the internet as ever, blogs and other means of communication are rampantly more important or even more prevalent than just informed meetings or public discourse face-to-face.
Do you think that civil discourse is forced upon students in these schools, and is that a good or a bad thing?
I think that civil discourse hasn't really been taught very well to students through the education program. I think if you look back to the classes you've taken, probably the only one, if you took it, was We the People, because this is probably one of the only classes that teaches kids how to be engaged and be informed for civil discourse.
I agree with my colleague Shane in saying that our schools have not really taught me civil discourse, but what it has though is sports taught through schools. I've competed in both baseball and football programs, which civil discourse does take place because you strive towards one goal as one team, which there are going to be problems, but you have to come together, which creates civil discourse.
I agree with my colleague Shannon, but I think that we as a people don't necessarily understand what civil discourse is. If we look towards Congress, they have an 8% approval rating, and they aren't achieving appropriate civil discourse either. And we as a nation need to learn to have civil discourse through programs like We the People, and it needs to be a responsibility of civic education.
In addressing your question more to the point, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that informed discourse is pushed on students, but it's strange to say that you can really force someone to have a conversation. Really, if you give them the time, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I feel that it's the school's responsibility to educate the students, and that's where laboratories of democracy can step in under the 10th Amendment and do that occasionally however they'd like. It is their responsibility to educate, but not necessarily hold the time for the public discourse.
How has the Constitution laid forth the promotion of civil discourse?
Well, I think through the First Amendment and the ability for people to have freedom of assembly, that leads into the idea that people can meet together in NGOs and to meet with people that agree with them and be able to promote civil discourse.
Building off my colleague Shannon's point, all of the expressions delineated in the First Amendment allow people to be informed on issues through press, assemble and talk about these issues, as well as not fear any repercussions if they are to talk negatively through their freedom of speech of the government and of issues that are controversial and difficult, and no one fears loss of their life or loss of their liberty if they are to speak their opinions.
It's also interesting to note that the Sixth Amendment requesting or providing that individuals have a right to the jury of their peers kind of promotes civil discourse in really a forced manner, like we were saying earlier. Only it's on a government-wide stance now. If individuals are forced to work together and come to ideas, working on the law and working on who is innocent and who is guilty, that is absolutely civil discourse, understanding where the laws are and what the legality of their peers' actions are.
You guys talk about the uninformed public a lot. What should the school systems do to fix the uninformed public? Because many of the students come through and many people, adults, come out of high school with government classes. Should they teach classes like this earlier? Should they institute a more We the People class in 5th, 6th grade and make it mandatory? What do you guys think?
I agree. I think it would be extremely beneficial if we decided to teach the children at a younger age about the government and about politics. As we talked to a former Senator Skaggs, he talked a lot about how one of the biggest problems was the uninformed public and how he really believed that education was important for kids to learn. And that was some of the major issues in America, was that kids don't understand what the government does and why it's there.
Congressman.
Congressman.
Everyone
Right.
thinks
No, it was
the
the third grade social studies. I was telling you to bring
It
that
was in
up.
the Senate.
Which state was that again, Mr. Clark?
Was that?
Sorry.
What state was that? Third grade social studies.
Virginia.
Virginia. I was
Oh,
I was
this
gonna
is the
bring that up.
wrong. This is the wrong version of the testimony. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
it
that's my
is.
bad. I
It
slapped
is the wrong version
some
of
edits on the
testimony.
old testimony. So I'm reading this, and I'm like, whoops.
I know, me too. Like, we saw that it's been laud and date that.
Yeah,
As soon as I
there
saw
was
the
a ton
date,
of
I was
stuff.
like,
So yeah, it was the same.
I mean-
it was their testimony.
Not bad.
Yeah, so that's why I was super choppy and stuff.
Yeah, and
that
kinda
was the
long.
old edit.
Okay.
How was it long?
437.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's-
445, excuse me.
yeah, that's totally
Yeah,
edited.
yeah, it's literally.
I sent the
edits.
wrong one. My bad. That's my bad.
It's Joe, we can
Okay.
fix it.
Yeah, it's much better than one.
Go ahead, comments.
I think you spend way too much time at the beginning on SOPA and PIPA. I really do. And I understand that it's a hot issue, but right now, when we're talking about public discourse, SOPA is about an overreach of, to take Reno v. ACLU, which doesn't, I think you gave it a little bit broader application than it actually has. It means that you can't just censor content willy-nilly on the internet. The Communications Decency Act was unconstitutional because it was a content-based restriction. But when you're talking about combating piracy, technically speaking, the government has the right to do that, and that's a corollary of the right to issue patents and trademarks. They have the right to police that. SOPA goes too far in that it does the linking thing, but I'm not sure that's necessarily about public civil discourse. You see what I'm saying? Because that's more about the right of a business to be able to link to somewhere that might happen to have pirated content on it,
Right.
and guilt by association.
Can I just offer a rebuttal?
Sure, I want to knock it down.
Okay, well, several websites like Wikipedia, Reddit, 4chan, Google, all protest SOPA,
And I
and
couldn't work last Thursday because of it.
I know
Wait, you can use Wikipedia?
many people failed essays, I'm sure, but really that in my age group with all the Facebook posts, I mean, I have never seen my age group more impacted and more interested in the politics of our government. That really only happened when the threat of their Facebook and YouTube was going to go away. So really the threat that their favorite websites are going to go away spread the most popular uprising in civil discourse that I've ever seen.
So then maybe you need to frame your answer that way.
Right.
Okay.
And it still needs to be a minor footnote and not the entire intro, because I felt
Right.
like it sounded like the entire intro was SOPA.
Right.
So I'm just to slap that down. I think once you got out of that, you did well in terms of the everything else. The other kind of thing that I wanted to actually throw out at you though is this idea of the balkanization of the media and the balkanization of of political discourse in this country. Because there's a book, it's kind of going a little partisan here, one of Al Gore's books. He was a journalist before he went into politics, and it's called The Assault on Reason. It's a very partisan, very liberal book. But he does have some interesting points on media, in the sense that there's media 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. The 1.0 was the printing press. The printing press enabled people in general to just print stuff and spread information. It was good for democracy, especially as people got literate. Media 2.0 was bad for democracy because people were just receiving what they heard on radio or saw on television, and they weren't interacting with it, right? And then Media 3.0 is the internet, and that people can interact and create content and all of that. But the negative effect of that is that 20 years ago, 20 years ago when Clark and I were kids,
That was like 10 years ago.
Thank you very much, I appreciate that. Well, but 20 years ago, we didn't have the internet. You know what you had? We had the Random Gazette-Journal, which was a lot thicker, and we had ABC, NBC, CBS. We had what's up?
And CNN.
And CNN. We had like just these streams of information. And this whole idea of like there being like the mainstream media is that's the idea. That's where that sprang from. There was no internet. There was no there's no way to blog or anything like that. If I wanted to talk about politics, I could shout at my neighbor or be one of those crazy guys in the tinfoil hat in a newsletter. I mean, that was it. But now that people can choose where they go, besides there are people who are conservatives who go exclusively watch Fox News and they exclusively go to redstate.com, and there are liberals who exclusively go to Huffington Post and Daily Kos and watch MSNBC. And now we have this divide, and I can tell you right now, like anybody I know that's super liberal, they're getting one set of information because they're so emotionally unable to handle dealing with anything that's conservative, and vice versa, that the reason we don't have public discourse is that we have two completely different spheres of information. It's as if we're not handling the same facts. We're not arguing for the same concept nucleus of facts.
But isn't it the same under mainstream media 2.0?
Absolutely not.
No?
No, because because the options were limited, and most people watched TV. Most people watched Peter Jennings or Tom Brokaw or Dan Rather, and so really the narrative was shaped by a very small set of very powerful journalistic entities, and so there was mainstream thought. Now there's a problem with that, in that there's very few entities are controlling what you're hearing, but the reverse problem we have now is that because people are selecting where they're going and they're only getting news that suits them. And I personally think that that's the biggest, besides the lack of education, and I think the lack of education fuels it. That's the biggest problem.
Is that since people they just choose what they want to hear. Instead
People
of
hear what they want to
having
hear.
5 channels.
Exactly.
You have to hear it.
Exactly.
I see that.
Exactly. So,
And was it called the Balkanization?
I said balkanization, like the Balkans, like the former Yugoslavia, when it all split up into
Okay.
separate, as opposed to it being, one country that splits up with kind of one media megalith, which was problematic because alternative views weren't heard. But now that alternative views are heard, people will only go to their,
Right.
So that's, I think it's a major issue. But,
Right.
so anyway, I'm gonna stop talking now.
Kellen, you sound like you have marbles in your mouth tonight.
Yeah, that was.
Jesus.
Actually, with everyone, I just thought the emotion in the reading of the testimony was a little.
Well, because especially,
wow.
I mean, you can understand how it is when you first read the
Yeah,
first line,
no, I-
they
I-
know it's wrong, and like, this is
Oh,
gonna
it's
be brutal.
frustrating, yeah.
It's like,
demoralizing.
this is just ruined this
So just
entire
make sure
program.
when you have to give one, you just a little
Yeah,
more emotion.
for sure.
You guys are good when you answer
I feel
your
bad.
cross-ex questions with the emotion and
Yeah.
the eagerness. Just when you read that.
This is
Yeah.
oh shit.
Yeah, we definitely realized we messed up.
On the
But civics.
testimony, when you
Civics.
referenced, I think it was like a section 19, was that
Civic
an article?
participation.
That was
Senate?
said, that's fixed, that's
Civics.
fixed.
Okay.
Again.
Not civil,
Okay.
what's
Damn
civil?
it.
Civic.
One really
With
like
civic
specific thing
participation.
is on one of the questions, Shannon, you answered first, and
Honda
you said, I
Civic.
agree.
Honda
It
Civic.
was, what you think is
Civic.
better,
Spoiler on
and you agreed with nothing, so.
No, no, you're spoiled.
As far as-
I mean, great guy.
Yeah.
Wait, what did you ask?
It was like Scooter's question was.
What did you ask?
The uninformed public and how we could alter the education system or do whatever.
And
we
then you
need.
said
I agree.
Yeah, that threw me off a little bit. I'm like, okay, yeah, she
Listen,
agreed.
Yes.
Enthusiastic.
Big thing, and Jordan, you said you did a good job of answering it, but what is, in terms of civic participation, right? What is civics? You guys you answered it, but what is civics? Specifically, what's the definition of civics?
Moral
Like-
obligations.
NGOs,
No.
churches.
No, like the study of people, civics, like
Kind of.
study people's actions. I don't know.
Like general education.
Like I'm thinking like a civic
government
studies.
Government.
education.
It's government and,
Yeah. Civics is government. Is government participation.
Okay.
So when I ask the question, why is it the responsibility of people to take part in their civic society? What is, it's, you guys kind of answered, but voting, jury duty, participating in open public meetings, those things that involve the government in lots of different ways. And that's kind of where that question was headed. You guys kind of answered it, but I don't think you have a good idea of what civic.
So it's participation directly in government.
and
We
also
could have
say,
said voting.
and
So-
also kind of community, like community service to a degree also.
So I mean,
It's
doing
kind of
things
circled around,
for the community,
Right.
And
not
the
just
government's the epicenter of
Right.
that, yeah.
yeah.
So the whole time you guys were talking, to answer your questions, I was thinking like Constitution, Supreme Court case. I guess I'm
I
still
know,
like
like,
finding my
dang,
mind
it-
going.
This
It's
one's
like-
more the.
It is. Mr. Daniel said it, but if you're gonna, I think since you love the internet so much, I think ACLU is good. Know what it says.
Yeah, you heard me just
Right.
read it on my phone right then, so.